These coal operators try to get around regulations. When the Mine Safety and Health Administration collects samples of the amount of dust in the air, there are ways to fudge that. There are ways to give them inaccurate readings.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Kim Kelly is a freelance labor reporter and author of Fight Like Hell, The Untold History of American Labor, now out in paperback. And what's it called when you sell merch? A retail saleswoman now. She has a new shirt out that I have bought 2 of. I bought a medium and a large just in case I gain any weight. Look at this. Look at how cool that is. Wow.
I dig it.
I dig it. Yeah, so buy that, people. Go to her Twitter page, Grim Kim, and buy it. It's really good. And it's union made, obviously. Kim.
Obviously.
Welcome back to the show. Thanks for joining us.
It's a little early for me. I'm a night owl, so I'm doing my best out here.
Yes, and I appreciate you waking up early at 10:45 a.m. your time. Thank you.
Yeah, it's pretty embarrassing when you put it like that.
Yeah, well, so you have written an investigative piece for In These Times magazine about the rise of black lung among particularly Appalachia's coal miners. And that is, we're going to contrast that later on in the conversation to Alabama's coal miners who have not seen a similar rise, which is interesting, and we'll talk about why that is. But it's a very, very powerful piece. It is called The Young Miners Dying of an Old Man's Disease. So Google that and read it. It is, really, you can tell a lot of work went into this. There's a lot of interviews, a lot of personal testimonies, data, what the government is doing. I really do not cry often when I read, and I cried when I read this. Part of it could have been that I got up that morning at 2:45 a.m. to get on a flight, and I was reading it on the plane. But it's also a very powerful piece, and I really recommend people read it because the through line is that, or the emphasis that we're going to have is that they don't have to die. There's absolutely no reason for these people to be dying of black lung, and they are because of corporate greed. And so, Kim, let's start first with what was it that made you want to write this piece?
Sure, I know it. I guess for people that don't follow your show and follow what I get up to, it might be, some random tattooed broad from Jersey is going down to West Virginia to write about black lung. That doesn't necessarily seem like a natural fit, but I've been writing about coal miners for the past 2.5 years now, starting with the Warrior Met coal miners strike in Brookwood, Alabama, which is still not entirely resolved. There's still stuff going on with that. But once you start covering coal miners, you start meeting a lot of coal miners, and especially older folks and folks with a lot of experience. And that's a great way to meet people who are suffering from black lung. And actually, what really made me want to start digging into this was 2 things. First, I was talking to my friend Chuck, who is the VP of District 2, which covers Pennsylvania and a couple other regions. He's only a couple years older than me. I'm 35. And it had just kind of come up, the black lung thing. And I was speaking about it as if it had happened in the past. And he was saying, well, it's younger guys now too. Like I haven't gotten tested, but I know I'm not breathing as well as I used to. And that kind of stuck with me, like, oh, so my buddy, who I'm like, I think at that point we were sitting in the pool drinking daiquiris. He was telling me how he might have black lung. And that was just that just totally jumbled my brain up. I was like, that doesn't seem okay. That seems like something people should know about, because if someone like him is dealing with this and he's on top of everything, he's super knowledgeable about safety. Like if he's feeling like this, who else might be dealing with this situation? And also on a more, I guess, the sort of personal angle that kind of fueled me really wanted to dig into it. I was talking at another UMWA event. I was talking to my friend Danny, he's in his 60s. He's an older fella. He He's wonderful. He's from Mingo County, West Virginia. And he was telling me when he got diagnosed with black lung and the year that I was born. And I was like, man, your whole life you've been dealing with this. And I started telling him about my granddad who died from mesothelioma a couple years ago. He worked in a steel mill and breathed in all that asbestos. And I got into his lungs and it took him out before any of us were ready. And Danny said, oh, we call that white lung. And I was just struck again, like, oh, it's all so much more connected and all so much more, it's all so much closer than I had ever really anticipated. So I decided, you know what, I'm gonna look into this. I applied for a grant from In These Times to be able to go down and really dig into it. It took me probably 6 months to get the story finished. And then it came out as the cover in May. It's still living online. And it's had a pretty good, I guess it's got a pretty good reaction. I mean, people telling me how heartbreaking it is, because it is.
Yeah.
If you thought you got choked up reading it, like working on it for months and months, my heart has just been shattered into little
Yeah.
pieces by now.
I mean, I really couldn't imagine. And it's so, and like I said, it's not like it would be better if the deaths were like necessary in some way, but it does seem like it's made worse by the fact that there's just no reason for it. We got the rates I'm looking at this graph that you have in your article, and we got the rates down in like 1998 to less than 5% of all minors were diagnosed with black lung. Less than 1 in 20. And the majority of those were minors that had 25 years or more. Now, there are just as many minors who it looks like from this graph, there's just as many minors who've only been in the mines 10 to 14 years that have black lung, that have been diagnosed with black lung, as 25-year veterans were diagnosed with black lung in the 90s.
And for those veterans too, 10 years ago, 1 in 30 like veteran coal miners who've been in there for 20 years or more were diagnosed with black lung. Right now, it's 1 in 8. That's a huge jump in 10 years. And also, when we talk about, spending 20 years in the mines, for most people, that sounds like an entire career. 20 years is a long time. But if you're 17, 18 years old and you go straight from high school into working in the mine, 20 years later, you're not that much older than me.
Yeah,
right. It's just really jarring. And even younger people, like I say, it's predominantly men, but, younger people, I know at least 2 guys who are in their early 30s. There's a guy I know who's 32 who's waiting for a lung transplant because he's worked in the mines. Like it's just so devastating. And when I spoke to health experts, people have been tracking this, people at NIOSH for years. And I think the word that one of the people at NIOSH I spoke to said to describe the jump was unbelievable. And when you have a health expert saying it is unbelievable that it's gotten this bad, that really makes you sort of sit back for a moment and think, oh boy, like this is a problem.
Right. Absolutely. And that's so important to emphasize too about the 20 years if you started at 18, which is, that's not uncommon for, if you're going to be a coal miner, you probably know that that's what you want to do through high school. You're not going to go to college. And so you're going to go down into the mines at 18, 17, 18, 19. And so a 20-year career puts you at 38. And the idea that you're going to, you have a 10% chance at 38 years old of having black lung, which is not curable, by the way. Can you tell us about the effects of black lung? What does it do when you get it?
God, it's so awful. And when we say black lung, that's the more colloquial term for a disease called coal workers pneumoconiosis. And basically what happens is you breathe in this material for a very long time. It was coal dust. And now silica is really the biggest culprit to what's fueling this current rise, because it's 20 times more toxic than coal dust. And coal dust ain't great. It's not a great thing to have in your lunch to start with. But you breathe it in, it builds up and it builds up, and you get these nodules, like these hard, fibrous nodules that grow in your lungs. And, we've seen, or if you Google black lung, you can see the difference between a healthy lung and a lung with black lung. Like, they do turn black, and you lose your capability to breathe. Like, there's like this iconic image of the old coal miner dragging around an oxygen tank. That's because they can't breathe anymore. You basically smothered to death, like loss of breath, loss of ability to walk around, just think of all the things you need to be able to breathe to do, which is everything. And just having that reduced lung capacity. And there's other like comorbidities come along with it. Some of the younger folks that I talked to for this article, what's happening now with this current wave, we're seeing younger folks also experience the most progressive form of the disease, like the most severe form of the disease. And with that also comes a heightened risk of heart problems. Like, for example, a condition called cor pulmonale, which enlarges the right ventricle in your chest, and the organs just kind of crush on each other. And it's not good for you. It doesn't work out so good. And essentially, it's just the way Danny described it. Seeing a coal miner die from black lung was like putting a fish on a table and watching him smother to death. It's just horrific. And
there's no cure for it.
No, there's no cure. That's the thing. It's a progressive disease. Like, once it's in there, there's not really much you can do about it except try to, live healthy and make sure you know where to get an oxygen tank. Like, it's a death sentence essentially. And I think the data, like the number I got, was that a diagnosis of black lung shortens your life by at least 12 years. And
wow.
If you're younger, like John Moore, the 42-year-old that I profiled as kind of the main person for this article, he's 42 and he has 3 kids and he has so much living left to do, but he's already having to plan out, I guess I should look into building a ramp for my house. So once I stop being able to walk up the steps, I'll still be able to get home. Like, that's what he's thinking about now, instead of, being excited about grandkids someday or thinking about his youngest going to high school.
Right.
It's just the fact that younger workers are experiencing this at such a heightened rate. It's just stealing so much more of their lives. And it's sad when anybody gets sick. It's sad when a 75-year-old coal miner gets black lung. But when you're 32, when you find out, you're going to die and it's going to be ugly, just the weight of that is just so crushing to think about.
And, this is something that's going to kill you at some point, and unless something else gets you before that. But then even in the interim, it makes your life worse, right? I mean, and that's intuitive. If it's harder for you to breathe, it's hard for you to do anything. I talked to a fella that, that I went to church with for a long time, and he didn't have black lung. He had COPD, I think. And he couldn't even take his trash can to the road, right? This is, and so the idea that you would have that limited mobility for, an extended period of time, that obviously cuts down on your quality of life. It's going to make it difficult, to play catch with your kids, right? To practice basketball with them or something like that. But also it's going to make it that much more difficult to kind of be healthy. If you can't go out and exercise because you're going to have like an asthma attack or something, then that makes it that much more. But then not being healthy increases your comorbidities and everything. I mean, it really is just the worst kind of thing to happen to a person.
Right. And if you can't breathe, you can't work, and you can't provide for your family in that way. And that is just an extra dimension that is just even more terrible. Because especially because we know coal miners, they're very proud people. They're those that who are men are very proud of being masculine, blue collar. Like, I'm a coal miner. That
Right.
means something culturally, personally, emotionally. And when you take that away from someone, when they've had that their whole life, and all of a sudden they need an oxygen tank or they need a wheelchair or they just can't, they have to depend on their partner or their wife to bring in the groceries. That does something to a person.
Right.
Like, just think about it shakes your whole self-perception. And also, who's going to pay the bills? The black lung benefits, even if, and there's such a, like, this is a whole other thing. If folks listening have time, you should really read Chris Hamby's Soul Full of Coal Dust. It's a great book that came out a couple years ago, and it really dives into just the absolute Byzantine horror of the red tape and the bureaucracy and all the roadblocks that miners with black lung experience trying to get black lung benefits to which they are entitled. It's so hard to get those benefits. And then when you get them, I think the cap right now for a person with 3 or more dependents is about $1,700 a month. And that is nothing. Even in a place where costs are lower, $1,700, that's like rent, a couple bills, maybe a couple grocery shops, and then what's left over. That's no way to live. And if you have fewer dependents, it goes down and down and down. Like, you can't live off of it. If you can't live off of the black lung benefits, if you're able to even get them, and you can't work, what are you supposed to do?
Right.
And then, yeah, it's all around. It's a terrible thing to happen, and we've been saying that this doesn't have to happen. But why is it happening?
Well, there's a geological answer, and then there's a political capitalist answer, right? So in the most neutral terms, the reason that folks are getting sicker quicker right now is in the Appalachian coal seam. We've been busy down there for centuries, right? Like, the seam, it's thinned out. And now, in order to get to the coal that that the miners want, that their employers want, they have to go through more and more layers of rock and quartz and sandstone. And what is in those layers of rock? Silica. Silica is the biggest problem, because when you breathe that in, like I mentioned before, it is 20 times more toxic than coal dust. It's like breathing in ground up glass, essentially. It is very bad for you. And workers in other industries know, they know this, like people in construction, they've been dealing with silicosis for years. They know this is an issue. NIOSH and OSHA, all these government acronyms, like, we've known for a very long time that this is very bad for you. And yet coal miners have been legally allowed to ingest twice as much of this substance as any other worker in the country. We'll get into the regulations in a minute, but essentially they're breathing in poison because of the condition of the mines. And it doesn't, like we keep emphasizing, it doesn't need to be like that, because we know how to prevent it. We know about engineering controls and ventilation plans and good PPE and all of these different, very doable mechanisms by which you can make the mine safer. You can cut down on the dust. You can protect the workers on the job. We know how to do that, but that takes a little bit of time. It takes, you got to move a little tiny bit slower to make sure everything is in place, everything as it should be. Maybe it costs a little bit of money to fit things out the right way. And those conditions are what coal mine bosses do not want. They don't want to slow down. They don't want to spend money on worker safety. They want to make a profit. They want to get that coal out of the ground and that money into their pockets. And anything that gets in the way of that one single-minded goal is something that they are not interested in. And one of the miners I spoke to did say, some coal mine operators, like, they're pretty good about that, because perhaps they realize that you cannot get anything done without workers. And then if your workers are getting sick and having to leave, then that's not really great for your bottom line. But
right.
It's very much an ongoing issue with these coal operators that try and skirt the rules. They try to get around regulations. They try and send in, when MSHA, the Mine Safety and Health Administration, they send in inspectors or they collect samples of the amount of dust in the air. there are ways to fudge that. There are ways to give them inaccurate readings. There's always a way to get around doing what you're supposed to do. And it really seems like even though they know this is a problem, the miners know this is a problem, it's at the very least in these communities, in this context, we know black lung is a problem. It really seems like these employers just don't really care, or at least don't care enough to alter their current business plan. And that's because they're greedy and they want to make money. And it just makes me think of this centuries old statement. I'll just to paraphrase a coal boss in 19 or 18 Dickety whatever, saying, it seems that if it seems like we treat the mules better than the men, you have to buy a mule. You can always get another man. And it seems like that mentality has not shifted that much since the 1800s.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
The you said that it's not only do these coal companies, like, they don't want to do these extra safety measures because it costs money, but they're fighting attempts to make them do these to make them abide by stricter safety regulations, aren't they?
Oh my gosh, for years. So for years, like I mentioned, Nash and all the various Ashas, they've known silica's a problem. Silica's bad for you. We should limit this. We should have some kind of federal rule limiting the amount of silica that coal miners can be exposed to on the job. And the first real push that we saw on a federal level to implement, a better silica standard, a better dust standard to really kind of combat this was in 2014 during the Obama administration, when they were trying to push through, which even I think is still a fairly conservative rule. They're trying to push it through, and they got sued by all these coal mine operators like Bob Murray and all of these coal bosses were like, oh, no, we don't want that. We don't do that. We don't want more regulations. We don't want more of an onus on us to actually act like human beings. And it's slowed down the process to the point where we're just now, thankfully, hopefully, at a point where we're going to get a revised silica rule in the coming months. But there's all of this wasted time, and the coal bosses were trying to stop it. The entire Trump administration was just like a wash for worker safety and for coal miner safety specifically. One thing that really stood out when I was reporting this piece, it came out after talking to one of the UMWA's governmental affairs people. He was saying, during the Trump administration, they picked a former coal executive to head MSHA, and he spent all of his time trying to cut regulations. So that took us back. And in those, it's only 4 years, but how many people got sick in those 4 years? How many people have gotten sick since 2014? We're only now at a point where we have new leadership at MSHA, who is a West Virginia boy who actually cares. Chris Williamson, his granddad was a coal miner. He and his the folks that work with him have been pushing for this new silica standard rule that would lower the amount to which workers in coal mines can be exposed. They would cut it in half, and which would bring them in line with every other worker in the country. They would stop being the exception. And even now, we're in this public comment portion. I had to learn a bunch about rulemaking and policy, all this stuff, just to follow the progression of this rule. And right now, we're in the public comment period. I'm going to a hearing in West Virginia next week to hear what folks have to say. Even now, there is, and I've seen it in the public comments, a concentrated effort by coal executives, coal bosses, pro coal types, to try and delay the regulation. They've sent in all of these public comments, and a bunch of them are identical. They're like clearly copy and pasted. Like even now, with all of the science, with all of the evidence, with all of these people suffering, they are still trying to get around the implementation of a rule that would save those folks. They're still trying to get around being made to do the right thing. And it's really just, God, how do you sleep at night, honestly?
Yeah, exactly. It's
honestly.
so reprehensible. Yeah, I don't see how you can live with yourself knowing that you've placed greed above people's lives, like in such a real way. It's disgusting.
And, I mean, and this is one of those areas where, there are people that I think really kind of get a kick out of saying that there's absolutely no difference, or even that somehow, the Democrats are actually worse than Republicans. But I mean, there are differences, and this is a big difference. The Obama administration, for all of its faults, was moving towards a new silica standard to bring coal mines in line with every other workplace in the country regarding this. And when Trump came in, like you said, he appointed a coal executive, and not only did they squash that new rule, but they tried to roll back some other regulations protecting coal miners. And people died and are gonna die because of that.
Yeah, it's just that was something that was, it was interesting to see, because we're politically in a pretty similar place. But just seeing that very real evidence of, it actually, when it comes to these government agencies that most people don't even know, who knows what goes on in there? I didn't until I started researching this, and then seeing just such a stark difference. It's like, wow, this, you think conceptually, this stuff probably matters, but just thinking about between 2014 and 2023, that is a big chunk of time. There's like, how many lives have been destroyed because there was the wrong person in office, or the wrong person was hired by whoever's in office,
Right.
or there's the wrong agenda in place. But that is one thing about the whole like Trump's messaging around, we care about coal miners, I love coal miners. Like, okay, that's a whole other thing to get into at some other point in time. We don't have all day. But this is just a very simple and very obvious example of that being BS. If you want to preserve coal jobs, if you want to make jobs better and conditions better for those workers, maybe do what you can do to make sure they're not breathing in poison.
Right.
That's a pretty low bar. But when you had the opportunity and the choice to either continue with what the Obama administration was trying to do, or do it your own way, sure, who cares? Who cares who does it, as long as it gets done? But actively deciding against it, like, I don't care, I'm just going to bring in a person who he described his mission as getting rid of quote unquote burdensome regulations on the operators. It just shows just how hollow it all is. Like, if you are the most powerful person in the world, and you don't use even a moment of that power to help prevent coal miners in Appalachia from dying an early death, like, what are you even doing? What is the point? Like, how dare you even say their names, say the name of their profession, if that's what you're going to do with your time and power?
Right. And so something that I noticed in your piece that was really interesting to me is that this is happening in Appalachia, but not so much in mines outside of Appalachia. And there are a couple of differences in the Appalachian mines and non-Appalachian mines, and one of them is that, broadly speaking, the non-Appalachian mines are newer. And so, like you said, there's the coal is kind of fresher. There's more of it there near, in higher density. Whereas in Appalachia, those mines have been there for, forever. And they're really kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel, so to speak, with the coal there. But also, non-Appalachian mines are much more highly unionized. Talk to us about what do you think the breakdown is of the difference? Like, how much of the lack of black lung do you think can be attributed to the high unionization rates in coal mines in Alabama, for instance?
I think it is such a big difference. I think it's so important. I mean, when I called, I talked to a person who works at the only Black lung clinic in Alabama, which is actually in Birmingham. I asked her, who's the youngest person you've seen come in here? Because I'm looking into younger folks dealing with this.
Mm,
And she thought about it. She said, I think the youngest I've seen is maybe in their 50s. And that's still younger than it should be, but it's not 32. That's a
Right.
pretty stark difference. And the fact that Alabama's mines are so heavily unionized, that means that there is somebody watching. There are mine
right.
safety committees. There is someone who has these workers back. There is so the Mine Safety Act, like the 1969 and then updated in 1977, that is that is what created MSHA. That is the implementation of that is what led to that massive, drop in Black lung cases because, it did something about it. Oh gosh, I was in the middle of saying, oh yeah. So the Mine Safety Act, it does have. You think I would have this down by now? I've been thinking about it for 2 years, but it's early. But
It's
yeah, there
early
are
at
a lot of.
10:45 at 11:30 now.
Look,
Okay.
look, you've stayed up late with me before. You know how I do.
That's
But
true.
all of that to say, so the Mine Safety Act, it provides a lot of very strong protections for coal miners. Like that is not a flimsy piece of legislation.
Right.
And one of the programs it implemented that it allows for is something called Part 90. And
Mm,
essentially that if a worker wants to invoke Part 90, that means that they have the legal right to be moved. If they've been diagnosed with this illness, they can be moved to a safer part of the mine where there's less dust, where there's less physical activity needed. They can be moved to a safer job and they cannot be penalized. Their pay can't be docked. Their seniority can't be messed with. Like
mm,
they have the right to a safer job. And on paper, that sounds great. Like, oh, everybody should do that.
right.
But the thing is, not everyone feels like they can, because if
Mm,
you're not working in a union mine, you're on your own and you speak up to your boss, hey boss, I want to take advantage of this, or hey, I'm interested in this.
mm,
What's to stop them from just firing your butt or not following the rules or just ignoring you? Or if you go over there, who's to say you won't be retaliated against? It's just not having the power of a union, the power of your coworkers, and the power of oversight. Like it's so much less likely that folks are going to take advantage of that program. For example, like the rates are very low in.
mm.
I'm trying to think in West Virginia. I think, and this is going to sound fake, but for the best of my recollection, I think Sam Petzonk, the lawyer I spoke to for this piece, he was saying he was happy. They were up to maybe about between 8 and 12 miners in West Virginia had taken advantage of Part 90.
Mm,
And that is so, so low.
right.
It's just the workers don't know about this because, again, if your union isn't there to offer education and help and resources, how are you going to know unless you're just reading the Mine Act for fun? Like, there's just so much. There, obviously, we know there are so many benefits to having a union in any workplace, but in this specific instance, when it's a choice of either being completely on your own, dealing with a debilitating disease and an employer that literally doesn't care whether you live or die, or dealing with all of that with the power of a union, with the help and support and resources that a union brings, I mean, it just goes to show how important that really can be. Like a union can be life and death.
Right.
And I'm really thankful that the miners in Alabama do have a union and do have the ability to get help if they need it.
Mm,
And, it's the Alabama is technically like part of the Appalachians go down in there.
right.
Like you,
But
you
most of the
could
mines in
think the
Alabama,
epic.
most of the mines in Alabama, I think, are in the Black Belt, right? I'm not. Are there any? Maybe there are. Are there mines in North Alabama?
I don't know. I feel like that's maybe I'm punching above my pay grade right now, but maybe that's like a clumsy example. But just thinking about just going back to the idea of it doesn't have to be like this, right? If
Right.
miners in Alabama aren't dealing with this, there's no reason that their brothers and siblings a few states up should be.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
So the and I think that is such an important point to emphasize because, you know, where we can, of course, we want government regulation, and government regulation obviously saves lives. And so where we can utilize state power to protect workers, we want to do that. And we're not opposed to that. And it's good where that happens. But we've seen, you know, this new silica rule has been in the works for what? I mean, almost, you know, it was initially put forward, probably almost 10 years ago. And like we said, so many people have died. So many people are going to be killed by the lack of movement here. And so in the interim, coal miners need unions. And in the interim, and then even afterwards, even after that law is passed, because you've just talked about how even the laws that do exist are kind of flimsy. But, you know, coal miners and everybody that need unions so that they can protect themselves. And they can have the power to make sure that they're going to be able to stay safe and keep their brothers and sisters safe when the government isn't going to be able to do it for them. And so that, you know, I really appreciated seeing that in the piece. And so, you know, after that piece has come out, there has been some movement. I know that there's been a lot of work, like you cite in the piece, before it. So, you know, but I'm sure that this piece was part of, you know, lighting a fire under some people. And so after this piece came out, MSHA did release a new silica rule. And you have been talking to, you went to D.C. to talk to lawmakers about this issue. And so what moves is the federal government making, and how and how do you feel about the prospects of something being done here?
Right. So MSHA, this has been kind of their signature issue since Assistant Secretary Chris Williamson got sworn in. I think it's only been about a year. He's made this kind of his signature issue. Besides pushing for the rule, they also launched a silica enforcement initiative that essentially means that when repeat offenders, mine operators who have been skirting the rules or sent back bad samples, or like they've found to be in violation of various regulations, like there's a little bit more teeth in there. There's a bunch of different, I'd have to go back and like go through it. So it's been a little while since I've written about it, but so MSHA is trying to go a little bit harder on the bad guys, essentially. So shout out to them for that. They've launched a new app that has safety and health info. Like I feel like they've been doing as much as they can for underfunded, understaffed federal agency, right. Which, you know, there's only so much you can do, but it does seem very clear this is a priority. But when I went down there to DC, I actually got a lot of meetings. I was not anticipating that because I'd never really tried to do that before. I try to avoid the federal government at all costs, really. But when it comes to things like this, it turns out they can be a little bit helpful. I spoke to staffers for Senator John Fetterman. He's my guy in Pennsylvania, Senator Bernie Sanders, Senator Joe Manchin, which is interesting, and Representative Summer Lee, who's also from PA, and Representative Ro Khanna from California, because he's one of those people that's been like fairly outspoken about workers. And I got to speak to staffers for all of them. I actually sat down with Representative or Congressman Khanna, and that was pretty interesting. He didn't. This isn't his wheelhouse per se, right. But he was very receptive to listening about it, and he seemed pretty horrified by it. And he said, you know, if there's any kind of legislation or you want me to sponsor, let me know what we can do to help. And I appreciate that, even if it's just the kind of thing a congressperson says to a person in their office. It was still, It was nice to hear, you know. And when I spoke to the staffers for the other senators, some of them were much more actually, most of them were pretty on top of it. Like, obviously, Manchin's office, this is kind of like the one thing he's cool about, right? So they were very, very much up to date. So were Fetterman, so was Bernie's. And it was nice to see that they were paying attention. It seems like right now the biggest asks that were coming from advocates and folks have been doing this work way longer, because of course I reached out and asked them before I went, like, what do you want to see? Like, I just kind of lucked into this opportunity. What should I say is the messenger for you and your hard work. And the silica rule is huge. And also, folks are really trying to see the confirmation of Moshe Marvit, who is this really fantastic lawyer from Pittsburgh. He's a good guy, workers advocate. They're trying to get him confirmed to, I think it's the Federal Mine Safety Board. I might be butchering the title, but something of that nature, to keep an eye on this, right? To see, yeah, it's a good place for he's a good person to be in that place. And his nomination, he was nominated like a year ago, and the Republicans have been blocking it because he likes workers.
Because he's a good person? Yeah.
Yeah, essentially, that's the problem. So one of the asks was to try and convince the electeds to kind of move to a floor vote and try and get all the Democrats to at least confirm him to that. And it seemed pretty productive. It was cool to, I guess, just run around the Capitol unsupervised and talk to people about this issue. And actually, a couple of the Manchin staffers that I met are coming down to West Virginia next week to the hearings to see what's going on. They hadn't known about it, so I got to tell them, like, you should go to that probably, which is kind of wild, like. But, everyone gets their news from different sources. People get a lot of emails, sure, whatever.
Right.
But all that to say, like, we're in this public comment portion. I know the UMWA had changes they had wanted to see implemented in the rule. I know they have opinions and thoughts about it. And I'm sure the Black Lung, the victims and the advocates, like, I'm sure there's more that they want to see too. And I'm really excited to go down to West Virginia and hear from them directly. I'm going to be writing about that for In These Times. And probably just weeping the whole time.
Yeah,
I get so emotional about my boys. But all that to say, yeah, it seems like things are in a better place than in terms of getting stuff done. They're in a better place than they have been for quite a long time. It's really unfortunate that we're also in such a worse place in terms of the health risks and the amount of people who are getting sick. It's almost like we knew about the risks of silica in the 70s. It's 2023, and we're finally getting to a point where we might cut it down to, 50 micrograms of exposure. Personally, I would like to see 0. I think that is a good thing to aim for. But if it took us, 30 years to get to 50, like, okay, I guess that is the glacial pace of government bureaucracy. And also dealing with all these lobbying interests and dealing with different people being in charge of different departments. Like I after speaking to people and kind of taking that in, I can see why things take so long. I don't understand or agree that it is reasonable for things to take that long, but I can see why it takes a while to get stuff done. But thankfully, it seems like we're at a point where some stuff might get done. And that is a bright spot in this whole awful crisis.
Yep. Well, we really appreciate all the work that you're doing to bring light to this issue. It's really important. We appreciate you taking the time this morning to talk to us. Is there anything else that you wanted to say about this, or any plugs that you wanted to make before we let you go?
Oh, so anybody can make a public comment. You may have to do a little bit of Googling, but you can go in and you can write your comment and write something in support of passing this rule. You can, especially if you live in one of the impacted states or in a state where coal production is a thing, because there's a bunch of them, you could reach out to your elected officials and just kind of hammer home like, hey, this matters. People are watching. We want you to do this. It seems like sometimes people listen, especially when it comes to something like this, because it is such a light lift. And so it's even the kind of thing that could be bipartisan. Like nobody wants coal miners to die. Nobody wants this to be happening. It's just this unfortunate side effect of this rampant corporate and coal boss greed. And that's the whole, I'm sure if you're in a Republican state, good luck. Mm-hmm. But also you never freaking know, right? Like this is like coal miners are one of those, they shouldn't be an issue, but coal miners as a concept are one of those issues that kind of transcends a lot of different barriers culturally and politically that we're taught are very static. So you can do that. You can try and help. Because the more they know that people are listening, the more they know people care, the better the chances that they're going to pass something good. So that's something you could do. Could take like 5 minutes, and just yeah, keep paying attention. I'm gonna keep writing about this. I think I'm gonna be doing kind of like a whole little series of interviews with the folks down there that I talked to, just to kind of keep things going and get their voices out there, because like I always think of myself as a human microphone stand, right? Like we want to hear from them, which is something that I think you guys understand very deeply. So all that to say, that's what I'm working on. And then if you wanted to pick up or pre-order a copy of my book, I wouldn't be upset about it. There is a section about Black lung activism in the 60s. There was Black lung has been a problem for a long time. In the 60s, there were all these wildcat strikes and all this all this union drama. Like it's such a huge story. I feel like I could write about it forever. But for now, we're focusing on Eyes on the Prize, this rule, and what's going to happen in Beckley, West Virginia next week.
Kim Kelly, thanks for your time. Like she said, pre-order her book in paperback and buy her shirt. You can go to her Twitter page at Grim Kim. It is her pinned tweet. I'm going to show y'all one more time, the people that are watching us on YouTube. It's really cool. Union made in Philly.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks so much for your time, Kim. We really appreciate it. And just keep up the good work. Keep shedding light on these stories and getting workers' voices out there. It really means a lot.
Well, heck, right back at you. Kidding me?
Well, thank you, Kim. Appreciate you.
All right. I'll talk to you guys soon. Thank you.
Bye.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.